A faint rustle behind the door stirred Vitaly Sokolov from sleep. His eyes snapped open in the darkness, and his heart pounded as if the taiga itself had whispered his name. He lay in a cabin steeped in the scent of firewood, his breath merging with the crackling of the stove. Yet the sound, quiet, insistent, like footsteps on snow, would not let him rest. Vitaly, a former forest ranger long accustomed to the solitude of Siberia's wilderness, reached for his fur coat. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but from an ominous premonition. He opened the door, and a blast of icy air struck his face. In the moonlight, a she-wolf stood before him. Her silver fur was matted and damp, trembling. Her paws sank deep into the snow. She did not growl, did not bare her teeth. Her dark, glistening eyes were filled with pain, and from her muzzle trickled what looked like tears. Vitaly froze. His throat tightened as he saw what she carried in her jaws. A tiny wolf pup, drenched and limp, its legs dangling lifelessly. Its head lolled to the side, one ear bloodied, its body seemingly without life. But the wolf's gaze, deep, imploring, spoke clearly, "He's still alive." Vitaly stepped back, his hand brushing the doorframe, but the silent plea in her maternal eyes overpowered his fear. She gently laid the pup on the porch, her mouth trembling, then stepped away. Her shadow fell across the snow, her gaze fixed unblinkingly on him. Vitaly, heart thundering in his ears, sank to his knees. The pup was cold, its ribs protruding, one hind leg bent unnaturally. Holding his breath, he studied it, and caught a faint movement. A shallow breath, its tiny chest stirred like a dying ember. "You've placed your trust in me," Vitaly whispered, his voice hoarse. He looked up at the she-wolf, who sat a few meters away, her fur glowing under the moonlight. He didn't know why she had chosen him, this man whose cabin stood at the edge of the taiga, but her mute, weighty trust settled on his shoulders. Gently wrapping the pup in his scarf, he retreated into the cabin. His steps were slow, careful not to alarm her. She did not move. Her eyes followed the door, full of hope he would not betray her. Inside, Vitaly laid the pup by the stove. His hands reached instinctively for a blanket, warm water, strips of cloth. He was no healer, yet the memory of forest wounds and herbal salves stirred in his fingers. Outside, the she-wolf waited. Her shadow kept vigil in the snow, and her low, mournful howl echoed through the taiga. Standing over the pup, whose life now hung by a thread, Vitaly felt this was more than a mere encounter. It was a calling, a tether drawn between him and the wild. And with a heart pounding like a drum, he answered it, uncertain where it would lead. He did not sleep. His hands moved in the dim cabin, while embers from the stove cast flickering shadows on the log walls. The pup lay wrapped in an old scarf by the fire, its tiny body trembling, its damp gray fur smelling of forest and blood. Leaning close, Vitaly dipped a cloth in warm water and gently wiped away the dried blood. "Hold on, little one," he murmured. His voice trembled, his eyes fixed on the slight rise and fall of fragile ribs. Outside, the she-wolf remained. Her silvered silhouette flickered in the snow, and her mournful howl pierced to the bone. He named the pup Spark, for the faint, flickering flame still glowing in its chest. Vitaly slid a hot water bottle beneath the scarf where Spark lay. Its warmth enveloped the tiny creature as he rummaged through an old chest and found a battered tin mug. Mixing water with a pinch of honey, he dripped it onto Spark's tongue. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from fear that life might slip away at any moment. When Spark weakly licked the droplet, Vitaly gasped. His heart clenched, then softened as a smile touched his lips. He glanced out the window. The she-wolf had lifted her head. Her eyes, glistening in the moonlight, seemed to sense the change. Morning brought unease. As Vitaly stepped outside for firewood, he noticed tracks in the snow, not from a wolf, but heavy, booted prints circling the cabin. His breath crystallized in the frosty air, and his gaze darted toward the forest's edge, where the she-wolf still watched. Her fur bristled, ears alert, The tracks led to the thicket and vanished into fresh snow. Nearby, Vitaly spotted a rusted fragment of metal, jagged, old, and unmistakable. A piece of a trap. Is this what you fled from? He whispered, his eyes meeting hers. And in her gaze, dark and shadowed, he found an answer that needed no words. He returned to Spark, his thoughts whirling. Who had left those prints? Hunters? Wanderers? Or merely the wind sculpting illusions in the snow? Still, the feeling that the she-wolf had brought Spark to him with intent grew stronger. He splinted the pup's injured leg with a small stick, tying it in place with strips of cloth. His movements were clumsy, but determined. I'm no healer, but we'll manage, he said aloud. Spark blinked open his clouded eyes and let out a faint squeak. His tiny voice was frail, yet full of life. As Vitaly stroked him, he felt a warmth he had long forgotten in his lonely cabin, a fragile, unfamiliar comfort. The she-wolf did not leave. Each day, she curled closer to the porch, her paw prints softening the snow around the threshold. Her howl grew gentler, almost like a lullaby. One morning, as Vitaly emptied the ashes, he caught her gaze. You're more than a mother, he murmured. You're hiding something. He recalled the old stories told by forest men, tales of wolves cast out from their packs, of lives shattered by steel jaws hidden in the undergrowth, the tracks in the snow, the shard of rusted iron. It was all part of her silent story, one he had yet to understand. The cabin became a haven. Its walls held warmth, the stove, a flickering hope. Vitaly fed Spark every 2 hours, while outside, the she-wolf's shadow stood guard. He didn't know what lay ahead. The prints in the snow hinted at danger, but her unwavering gaze, so full of faith, gave him strength. Spark's faint cries grew louder each day. Their struggle had become a shared one, and the taiga, vast, cold, and alive, seemed to whisper that their journey had only just begun. Then, her howl tore through the silence, a low, trembling wail that spilled into the cabin and made Vitaly flinch. He stood by the stove, hands scented with honey and smoke, holding the warm mug. His eyes were fixed on Spark, lying on an old blanket. The pup, though still weak, let out louder whimpers. His tiny paws twitched, and his muzzle stretched toward the droplets of water Vitaly carefully trickled onto his tongue. Outside, the she-wolf howled again, a sound heavy with sorrow, echoing through the forest and the soul. He was closer now, closer than before. Vitaly, setting the mug aside, stepped toward the door. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and awe. Spark was stirring. His eyes, no longer entirely clouded, glimmered in the firelight, and his feeble squeaks now filled the cabin with a fragile music of life. While wrapping his paw with a fresh strip of cloth, Vitaly noticed the trembling had lessened. The crusted wound on his ear no longer bled. You're a fighter, Spark, he whispered, his voice tender as his fingers stroked the pup's fur, warm from the stove. Outside, the new she-wolf lay at the threshold, so close now that her breath fogged the bottom step. She was calling him out, not with sound, but with stillness. He opened the door. Her silver silhouette lay motionless on the snow, her eyes shining with silent plea. Vitaly, bundled in his sheepskin coat, sat on the porch. His breath swirled into the freezing air. The she-wolf lay just a meter away, her head resting on her paws, her gaze never leaving his. You're guarding him, he said softly. Her ears twitched, as if in response. He remembered the tracks circling the cabin, the jagged trap shard, and his throat tightened. He had to understand how to help Spark. Back inside, he began rummaging through the old trapper's chest, the one that held the remnants of a past life. Amid cloth and knives, he uncovered a worn notebook, its pages faded and earthy scented. Filled with rough, slanted handwriting. It spoke of yarrow for blood, chamomile for inflammation. As he turned the brittle pages, hope stirred. He remembered where chamomile had bloomed the summer before, and vowed to find it, even buried under snow. This is for you, Spark, he whispered, watching the pup, whose cries had grown louder. That night, The taiga spoke in a different voice. Heavy, crunching footsteps echoed from the edge of the woods. The rhythm was wrong, unnatural. Not beast, but man. Vitaly leapt to the window, pressing close. His heart froze in his chest. The forest held its breath. Only the she-wolf moved, rising slowly, bristling, her eyes fixed on the dark. At dawn, new tracks were found, deeper than before, leading toward the river. They crossed the wolf's path, as though someone had been following her. Vitaly clenched his fists and turned to the she-wolf, still posted at the door. Her eyes were fierce, but not afraid. "You know who it is, don't you?" he whispered. Her gaze, vast and solemn as the forest, told him she did. He returned to Spark, whose tiny muzzle nuzzled into his hand. And there, Vitaly made a silent vow, to protect them both, even if he didn't yet know from what. The notebook lay open on the table, its pages now his weapons. The she-wolf's howl, his guiding star. The cabin, fragile and warm, had become their fortress. As Vitaly fed Spark, he watched the wolf whose shadow now lived at the threshold. Footsteps in the taiga, the old trapper's notes, her eyes. It was all part of a puzzle he was meant to solve. Spark's cry echoed through his chest, a sound no longer of weakness, but of defiance. Their shared battle had begun, and the taiga, harsh, ancient, alive, held their secret close, ready to either reveal it or swallow them whole. Thoughts wandered like wind through the cracks in the log walls, sinking into doubts as heavy as the snow beyond the window. Spark, curled near the stove, whimpered softly. His tiny paws flailed against the scarf, and his fur, drier now, gleamed in the firelight. Yet the question, should I keep him, tormented Vitaly. His heart was torn between the impulse to save and the fear of growing attached to a creature born of the wild, whose home was the taiga, not a wooden hut. He rose, his footsteps echoing through the quiet, and opened the old forest warden's notebook once more, leafing through it in search of answers that weren't there. But Spark was growing stronger. His cries rang clearer. His bright eyes tracked Vitaly's every move as he dabbed the wound on the pup's ear with a salve made of chamomile he had unearthed beneath the snow. The bound paw twitched, and Vitaly smiled, whispering, "You don't give up, Spark." But outside, the she-wolf, her shadow ever present at the doorstep, watched him. Her gaze, deep and severe, seemed to ask, "Do you?" Her howl was soft, but insistent. It called him outside. Vitaly donned his coat and stepped into the cold. His heart pounded as he made his way to the river to examine the tracks he had seen earlier. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The taiga breathed its silent breath, alive with the rustle of hidden life. The she-wolf appeared at a distance, her silver fur flitting between the trees. She led him, her paws silent in the snow. Following her, he barely noticed where he stepped, until the snow beneath his feet turned oddly smooth. Suddenly, she lunged ahead, growling. Her jaws snapped. He froze. Metal flashed beneath the snow. An old trap, rusted but still deadly. His breath caught. She stood close now, her muzzle inches from the trap, eyes locked with his. "I see," they seemed to say. He backed away, his hands trembling. Then he reached out and touched her fur, wild, warm, and alive. "You saved me," he whispered. The she-wolf twitched her ears and stepped back, her gaze shining in the dusk. She wasn't just Spark's mother. She knew the forest, its snares, its pain. Back at the cabin, he sat beside Spark, his thoughts spiraling, the trap, the tracks, her eyes. All of it part of a story he was only beginning to understand. "I can't keep you," he murmured to the pup. "But, let you go?" The she-wolf lay calmly at the threshold. Her breath was steady, her eyes filled with a trust he hadn't earned, but received. He carried Spark to the porch, bundled in the scarf. The she-wolf rose and touched the pup's snout with her nose. Spark let out a high-pitched squeak and wriggled his paws. Vitaly held his breath. Their gazes, his, the wolf's, and Spark's, met and tangled in silent understanding. "You're teaching me," he said. She lowered her head in what felt like a nod. The doubts still burned, but her faith, solid as the frozen earth of the taiga, gave him strength. The cabin, heavy with the scent of chamomile and smoke, had become their world. Vitaly, looking at Spark, whose life flickered stronger, and at the she-wolf, whose shadow guarded their door, knew their paths were now woven together. The trap in the snow, her eyes, his fear, it was all a trial the forest had set before him. Spark, whose voice had become their song, now slept by the fire, while the she-wolf's howl echoed into the night, guiding them deeper into the woods where answers waited. By morning, Spark was at the threshold again, his little paws, now free of bandages, pattering on the wooden floor. His clear cry rang through the cabin like a bell. Vitaly stood by the door, watching as the wolf pup, still unsteady, leaned toward the crack where the icy air carried the scent of the taiga. His fur, thick, gray, and soft, glimmered in the morning light. The scar on his ear was barely visible now. Kneeling, Vitaly gently stroked his side. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but from a joy so fragile it nearly broke him. Yet a shadow grew in his chest. Spark did not belong to him. He belonged to the forest that now called louder each day. The pup was thriving. The once broken paw now held him upright, though he limped slightly. His eyes, bright as coals, flicked at every sound. Vitaly fed him rabbit broth, salvaged from old supplies, and Spark lapped it up greedily, nose buried in the bowl. "You're a little wolf now," Vitaly whispered. His voice was tender, but the words caught in his throat. He knew, soon, he'd have to let go. Outside, the she-wolf sat silently. Her silver fur shimmered in the frost, her eyes wise and stern, as if she were reading his thoughts. Vitaly made a decision. He wrapped Spark in a blanket and stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath his feet. The she-wolf rose and came forward, nostrils flaring as she caught her son's scent. Spark sniffed the cold air, whined, and wriggled free, landing with a soft plop into the snow. His little legs scrambled, his nose pressed into the powder. The she-wolf licked him once, then looked up at Vitaly. Her gaze was warm, but within it flickered a shadow. "A warning, you know what's out there," he whispered, thinking of snares and tracks. And then he stepped into the woods. His boots sank into deep snow. The taiga said nothing, but its breath stirred all around him. Guided by instinct, he found a narrow trail, buried under fresh snowfall, marked by faint, old wolf prints. They led to a small clearing where the snow had been trampled down. In the center, a gnawed bone lay, scratched with tooth marks. Only one set of tracks. No pack, no other animals. Vitaly crouched and touched the frozen ground. His throat tightened. "You're alone," he murmured. The image rose in his mind, of her carrying Spark through the blizzard, her body shielding him, everything else already lost, her pack, her past, her world. But she had not given up. When he returned, she was waiting at the porch, her muzzle brushing Spark, who now pounced in the snow. His bark was still soft, unsteady. Vitaly sat beside them and watched her teach him to dig. Her paws moved the snow. Her eyes watched her son, never wavering. "You lost everything," he said softly, "but you saved him." The she-wolf raised her head and met his gaze. Her breath was deep and steady. Their bond had no need for words. It grew in silence, heart to heart. And Vitaly understood. His role was never to keep Spark, but to return him to the wild that had given him life. The cabin, warm with broth and firelight, was only a pause in their journey. Vitaly stroked Spark, whose limp was fading. He looked at the she-wolf, whose shadow now lived quietly in his heart. The trail, the bone, her solitude, they were chapters of her story, and now he carried it with her. Spark's clumsy bark had become their shared song. He ran near the threshold, tail high, while the taiga, harsh, vast, alive, called them with both danger and promise. Vitaly crouched by the steps. His hands, scented with earth, dug gently in the snow, showing Spark how to find roots. The pup, now firmly standing on his own legs, watched, learned, and began to dig. He buried his nose in the snow, his bark, soft, impatient, echoing across the yard. His fur, dense and gray, shimmered in the cold light, and the limp that had plagued him just weeks ago was gone, leaving behind only a faint scar on his ear. Vitaly laughed as he watched Spark imitate him, pawing at the snow. His tiny claws scratched and scattered flakes, but beyond the furs, where the she-wolf's shadow flickered, the taiga held something that made Vitaly's chest tighten. Spark had become a wolf. His legs were strong and swift, carrying him in leaps around the yard. His eyes, blazing with alertness, caught every movement, every sound. Vitaly fed him scraps of meat from his dwindling stores and noticed how Spark now tore at them with growing teeth, his snout already stretching toward the woods. "Are you ready, Spark?" he whispered. His voice was warm, but a hollow grew inside him. The pup belonged to the taiga, and the moment of parting crept ever closer. The she-wolf, lying at the forest's edge, watched them silently. Her silver fur glistened in the morning frost, her eyes stern yet tender, as if offering thanks. At dawn, she brought prey. Vitaly, stepping out for firewood, froze at the sight. A dead ptarmigan lay by the porch, its feathers fluttering in the wind. The she-wolf sat nearby, calm and still, her eyes saying clearly, "This is for him." Nodding in quiet understanding, Vitaly called Spark, whose muzzle pressed eagerly to the bird. His bark didn't grow louder, but something in his stance had changed. Vitaly watched the she-wolf guide her son, how she taught him to sniff, to bite, to dig. Her paws moved with grace, her ears twitching at the faintest rustle of the forest. "You're giving him life," he whispered. She looked up and met his eyes. Her breath came deep and steady, but the taiga began to whisper something else. A warning. That night, Vitaly woke to a noise. He stared into the darkness outside, past the frosted window, where shadows moved, not the shadows of animals, but something else. They were too quick, too quiet, and his throat clenched. At dawn, he found new tracks, unlike any he'd seen. They were clawed, dragged low, as if something crept while hiding. The she-wolf stood by the porch, growling. Her fur bristled, her gaze fixed on the trees where the shadows had vanished. "You know them," Vitaly whispered. Her eyes, sharp as blades, confirmed his fear. He returned to Spark, who was pacing near the stove. Stroking him, his mind raced, images of prey, lessons, shadows. All of it belonged to her world, a world he was only beginning to understand. "I can't keep you," he said softly, "but how'd I protect you?" Spark's nose pressed into his hand in response. The she-wolf's howl in the night had been a guide, but now, the rustling shadows spoke of a threat that had followed her out of the forest. Vitaly clenched his fists. He would not let the taiga take them. Not without a fight. The cabin, rich with the scent of meat and warmth, was their haven. Vitaly, teaching Spark, watched the she-wolf, whose shadow now lived quietly in his heart. The shadows in the forest, her gift, his fear, all of it was a test the taiga had given them. Spark, whose bark had become their shared melody, ran circles by the threshold. And the she-wolf, her eyes glowing in the dark, led them onward, deeper into the forest, where shadows hid and truth awaited. Her howl, gentle but resolute, carried far beyond the trees. A piercing howl tore through the silence and woke Vitaly. His eyes snapped open in the darkness of the cabin, his heart pounding as if the taiga itself whispered warnings. He lay on the bench, his breath merging with the crackling of the stove. But the howl, echoing beyond the window, called him to the door. Spark, asleep by the fire, stirred. His silver-gray fur glistened, and his now strong limbs twitched as if he were running through a dream. Vitaly rose and stepped to the window. His fingers brushed the cold glass. In the moonlight, he saw her, the she-wolf, her eyes glowing as she stared into the woods where the shadows moved. Spark had become a true wolf. His bark, once timid, now rang clear and bold through the yard. He chased after her, learning to prowl, to listen, to disappear into silence. Vitaly smiled as he watched, his heart singing with pride, but aching with the knowledge that their time was slipping away. He fed Spark the meat she brought, ptarmigan, hare, watching his teeth grow strong and his eyes burn with untamed fire. "You are her son," he whispered, stroking the pup whose snout pressed into his hand, though his gaze was already drifting toward the trees. One night, Vitaly could no longer resist the pull. He decided to follow the she-wolf's call, the one that came every night. Low and resolute, he pulled on his felt boots. His steps crunched across the snow, and she, moving ahead, led him through the woods to a clearing where he found an old trail. At the roots of a fir, he saw marks, deep claw scratches etched into the bark, thick with the scent of wolf, though dulled by time and moss. Nearby lay bones, untouched by wind or beast. Vitaly dropped to his knees and touched them. His throat tightened. "This was your pack," he murmured. The she-wolf lowered her head. Her eyes, heavy with shadow, confirmed his words. But the taiga watched him too. The wind murmured through the trees, not with the rustle of animals, but with a different rhythm, like steps that stopped when he turned. Vitaly clenched his fists. The chill bit through his skin, and he felt the unseen eyes of the forest follow him. The she-wolf growled and stepped closer, her fur brushing his hand. In that moment, he knew, she sensed them too. "You know what's out there," he said. Her gaze, sharp as ice, became his shield. The claw mark, the shadow, her howl, it was all part of the taiga's trial, and the forest was watching, waiting, testing. Back at the cabin, he sat beside Spark, whose paws scratched at the threshold. His bark called for her, and she came. Her nose touched her son's, and as Vitaly watched them, he felt their bond, hers and Spark's, stronger than fear. "I'll let you go, but not yet," he whispered to the pup. The she-wolf raised her head and looked at him, her eyes shimmering, as if the taiga had given her a voice. He knew then that the forest saw them. Its shadows were alive, close, inescapable. Their fate, the cabin, steeped in the scent of meat and smoke, was their fragile refuge. Vitaly, stroking Spark, watched the she-wolf. Her shadow now lived within his soul. The claw mark, the darkness, her eyes, her howl, they were riddles the taiga was slowly unraveling. Spark, whose bark had become their song, slept by the stove. And the she-wolf, howling in the night, led them toward the edge, where the forest waited for their choice. Spark darted through the yard, his legs strong and swift, snow bursting beneath his paws, his voice echoing. Wild and free, the bark, no longer a playful yelp but a clear, ringing call, echoed all the way to the firs. Vitaly Sokolov stood on the porch, watching the young wolf chase a stick. His gray fur flashed through the snow, and his eyes blazed with wild joy. But the taiga, usually alive with sound, fell silent. Vitaly held his breath. The chill he felt wasn't from the frost, but from a gaze watching him from the woods. The she-wolf, lying beside the cabin, sprang to her feet. Her fur bristled. A low, furious growl tore the air. Spark was ready for the forest. His teeth tore through the meat the she-wolf brought. His paws crept silently, mimicking her grace. Vitaly taught him to hide in snow, to listen, watching his ears twitch and his snout lift toward the trees. "You are her son, Spark," he whispered, his voice trembling. His heart ached with the thought that their time was ending. The she-wolf's eyes, aglow with wisdom, watched him. Her shadow was his guardian, but now she growled. Her gaze snapped to the edge of the woods. The shadows there had become real. They came at sunset, two hunters. Their steps cracked the crusted snow. Their rough voices broke through the trees. Vitaly grabbed Spark, clutching him to his chest. His eyes searched the gloom, and caught a glint of metal. A rifle. The she-wolf lunged forward, placing herself between the cabin and the forest. Her fangs flashed. Her snarl echoed across the taiga. "Leave," Vitaly shouted, his voice hoarse. But the hunters stepped closer. Their shadows stretched long. "Wolves bring trouble," one muttered, raising his gun. Vitaly clenched his fists and stepped down from the porch. The she-wolf did not retreat. She leapt. Her paws struck snow. Her jaws snapped near the hunter's legs. His rifle shook. The second man shouted. His voice tangled with the wind. Then came the shot. Sharp as thunder, it split the silence. Vitaly, hurling Spark into the cabin, ran to her. His heart stopped, but she was unscathed. She veered aside, her fur glowing silver in the moonlight. The hunters stumbled back, retreating into the forest. She stood at the porch, panting, eyes alive. Vitaly knelt beside her, his hands shaking as they touched her fur. "You protected us," he whispered. The she-wolf licked Spark, who barked at the door, then looked up at Vitaly. In her gaze, clear and knowing, he saw the truth. He could no longer keep them. Spark, the son of the taiga, had to go, and the she-wolf, its guardian, had earned her freedom. "I will let him go," he said, his throat tightening. She flicked her ears, as if nodding. Their bond, woven from glances and blood, was stronger than the fear the forest had brought. The cabin, steeped in warmth and dread, was now their final refuge. Vitaly, stroking Spark, looked at the she-wolf. Her shadow now lived inside his soul. The hunters, their rifles, her fangs, it was the battle the taiga had given them. Spark's bark, ringing from the stove bench, was their song. The she-wolf, eyes shining in the night, led them to a farewell waiting just beyond the door. Vitaly stood at the threshold. His hands trembled as they held the scarf that once warmed the pup. Now strong, Spark raced through the yard, his gray coat gleaming in the morning light. His bark, clear as a song, called for her. She stepped from the woods, her silver fur aglow, her deep eyes fixed on Vitaly. A farewell. His throat closed, his heart beat slow. Knowing it was their final day, the taiga waited, silent yet alive. Vitaly exhaled and stepped to the threshold, ready to let go. Spark was the son of the forest now. His strong legs followed the she-wolf, his sharp teeth tearing at the grasses she showed him. Vitaly watched, remembering the tiny whimper, the trembling steps, the fragile body in his hands. "You've grown, Spark," he whispered, his voice hoarse, eyes gleaming. The young wolf pressed his snout into Vitaly's hand and gave a soft bark. At the forest's edge, the she-wolf licked her son. Her muzzle was calm, but her eyes, locked on Vitaly's, said one word. "Thank you." He nodded, his chest tightened, and he sank to his knees, fingers brushing Spark's fur one last time. Their farewell was quiet. Vitaly stepped back, his feet heavy. The she-wolf touched Spark's nose, then turned. The pup barked, his legs springing with energy. He looked back at Vitaly, his eyes shining like stars, then bounded after his mother. Their shadows melted into the pines. The she-wolf's howl, soft and solemn, echoed over the taiga. Vitaly wiped his tears and smiled. His heart sang, even as it ached. "Be free," he whispered, and the forest, as if in answer, rustled with wind. The next day, Vitaly went into the taiga. His felt boots crunched in the snow, thoughts circling the glade where he had found the wolf's trail. There, he saw them, fresh tracks, light and playful, 2 sets, hers and Spark's. They wound toward the river, where the snow was trampled. Beside the tracks, a single grouse feather lay in the snow, like a sign. Vitaly touched the prints and felt warmth rise in his chest. "You're alive," he breathed. And the forest, its hush stirring around him, seemed to answer, yes. The tracks were a song, proof that he had chosen rightly. The she-wolf never returned, but her distant howl sang through the night. And Spark, his yips weaving into hers, sang with her. Vitaly stood on the porch, listening. His eyes searched the dark for their shadows, but found only stars. He knew they were running together, their paws drumming through the taiga, her wisdom guiding them. Their story, born in a blizzard, had changed him. Clutching the scarf, he felt a part of himself had left with them. Yet something remained. The cabin, soaked in warmth and solitude, grew quieter. Vitaly closed the shutters and looked out at the forest. Their tracks led deep into it. Their farewell, their song, his tears. All of it was a gift the taiga had given him. Spark, whose bark had once filled the cabin with life, now lived in the forest. And the she-wolf, whose eyes burned in his memory, guided him, just as she had guided Vitaly, to their freedom. Now, stacking firewood by the stove, Vitaly's roughened hands moved slowly. His thoughts circled back to that night, the night the she-wolf, crying, had brought Spark to his door. The cabin, scented with smoke and silence, no longer echoed with pause. The bench where Spark had slept stood empty, but the scarf that once warmed him lay folded, like memory. Outside, the taiga breathed. Its whispers were alive, and deep within, a howl sounded, low, solemn, and sacred. With the young yips weaving softly into the night, Vitaly held his breath and smiled. His heart sang their song. Life had returned to him, but it had changed. He repaired the porch, chopped wood, walked to the river. Yet every step was soaked with their traces. Spark's paws imprinting snow, the she-wolf's eyes shining deep in his memory. Their howl, echoing through the nights, was a gift, a testament. That they ran together, their fur flickering among the firs, her wisdom guarding them still. Vitaly stood at the threshold, listening. His eyes sought the stars, and the living, harsh taiga answered him, whispering their names. One day, he decided to return to the glade where he had found the wolf trail. His felt boots crunched over the snow, and in his pocket lay a bone, taken from the she-wolf's marking by the old fir, where scratches on the bark still held her scent. He stopped, his breath curled in the air. A distant, clear howl broke the forest's hush. Vitaly knelt and placed the bone at the roots. "This is for you," he whispered, his voice soft. His fingers touched the earth where their tracks led deep into the taiga. The rustling forest accepted his gift, the warm wind flowing through the trees. He no longer searched for them, but he knew they were alive. The she-wolf's howls came less often now, carrying her strength, while Spark's bright yips rang clear, just like that day. Their farewell had been freedom. Back at the cabin, Vitaly lit the stove. Its glow illuminated the scarf. Touching it, he felt their bond, not glory but heart, unbreakable. The taiga that had brought them to him now kept them safe. And he, a man become part of the forest, carried their story like a flame. The cabin, quiet and warm, had become his home, yet its walls held their shadows. Closing the shutters, Vitaly gazed toward the forest, where their howl was a song, a gift of the taiga. Their tracks, his heartbeats. It was the end of their journey, but the beginning of his new life. Spark, whose yips lived in the wind, and the she-wolf, whose eyes shone among the stars, were his guiding light, and the taiga, harsh and eternal, sang their story, binding man and wild forest together forever.